Oh, it's been an easy added apparently, so we are recording. Right, brilliant. Hello everybody, and thanks for coming. Thanks so much. I've given more seminars than I can count because I'm so damned old now. But this is my first ever webinar, miraculously. I don't know how it's taken so long to do it, but it is. So be gentle with me. I am a webinar virgin, and I've not done this before. So, all being well, I should be able to advance this slide in just one moment. Top tips to boost your business English lessons. That actually wasn't my title. It was the title that Macmillan came up with, as you can see, quite catchy, lots of alliteration. I hope that they will be tips, and they're definitely going to be business English, and I do hope that they boost your practice. But my real title is this. You'll notice I hesitated there because I understand the slides take a little while, sometimes a second or two to come up. So hopefully you can see less is more, which is a well-known cliche now, but I thought I'd find out who originally said it. Now, apparently it's this guy, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who was a modernist architect. And it's a notion that I've got a lot of time for. Speaking as somebody who's written lots of business English materials that are quite dense, I like to get a lot on the page. It's striking me more and more lately that you can get a lot of mileage out of a lot less. And what we'll be looking at for the next 40, 50 minutes or so is essentially what we can do with a blank page, beginning with nothing and getting something. And we'll be looking at language of negotiations, presentations, emailing, conversation. We'll also be feeding in a bit of technology on video and so forth, so don't worry, some of it will be more high-tech and some of it less so. But my feeling is that we could be doing a lot more with a lot less. I like those lessons, I don't know about you, that don't take very long to prep, but they last ages in the classroom and everybody gets to talk and learn something. So very little in and lots out. And that's really the theme of everything that we're looking at this afternoon. So if we start with what we always start with, a blank sheet of paper. I mean, what are the possibilities? If you've ever tried to write materials yourself, you'll know this is the most terrifying thing to look at, the blank screen, when you haven't got anything. And so the first thing that I'd like us to think about is, just what we can get out of nothing. Now, I know that at the moment, making lessons out of what the learners bring to the classroom is quite fashionable and popular. Many of you will have read articles and books by people like Scott Thornbury, Lindsay Clanfield on dogma and materials like lessons, focusing on the language that emerges in the classroom. But really, I mean, this approach completely predates dogma. It's always been a really strong theme in language teaching, and of course it's not one that publishers often promote for obvious reasons. But these are the things I'm going to be sharing with you today. And the first one up is negotiations. And I've recently actually been teaching a negotiations course to a group of Spanish business people. And if you've ever taught the language of negotiations, you'll know that there's often a problem with how direct or indirect to be in a negotiation. And my Spaniards, I have to say, nothing against the Spaniards, my wife is Spanish, but they do tend to go for the direct approach. So everything is either impossible or can't be done, or you must do this, and if you don't do it, we won't give you what you want. And I keep hearing this in every role play that I do with them. It's impossible, it's not possible for me, you must do this, if you want from me, I can do for you, and I'm telling them, look, ease up on that direct language, guys, because, And so this whole lesson that we're looking at is about deciding how to be direct when you want to be, and indirect when you need to be in a negotiation. A little story to set us off. That's a story I sometimes tell my students to try and bring home to them the importance of register. Two priests, in Ireland probably, let's be stereotypical. A couple of priests in Ireland, old guys, both of them chain smokers. So addicted are they to nicotine that they even find themselves smoking in church during the service. And they develop a guilty conscience about this and decide to go and see the bishop to ask for formal permission to smoke. And the first priest approaches the bishop and says, Your Grace, I have a question to ask. Would it be all right if I smoke while I'm praying in church? And the bishop, of course, is horrified at this and says, absolutely not. It's an absolute disgrace that you would consider doing this. You may not smoke in church. Permission denied. Priest leaves. His friend, having seen this, comes in a little later and says, Your Grace, I have a request to make. I was wondering, would it be all right if I pray while I'm smoking? To which the bishop, of course, replies, well, certainly, my son, of course. I mean, you can always be praying. You can be praying on the bus. You can be praying in a shop. You can be praying when you're smoking or when you're gardening. Bless you, my son. Of course you have my permission. Which just goes to show that it's not just what you say, but how you say it and how you package it. So in course books, you'll tend to find that this language is taught of in the grammar section, the grammar of diplomacy, it's sometimes called. Things like using modal verbs, using softeners like I'm afraid and with respect, using past continuous to keep the door open to negotiation. So really what we're looking at right now, this first one up, is a grammar lesson. And you can spell it as a grammar lesson, but it's also a negotiations lesson, and to some extent it's a conversation lesson. So this is how it works. And I hope these diagrams help you. I spent a long time on these, knowing I wouldn't be able to see you. So imagine a class of 6 students. This will work with certainly up to 20 or so, maybe more. Might want to put them in groups if you have a very big class. You've got 6 students. They sit in a kind of a circle, learner A, B, C, D, E, F. And they each have, as you can see, a blank sheet of paper in front of them. And they're going to be passing these papers around between them as the activity goes on. So in a moment I'll show you what they do. Paper A from learner A goes to learner B passes on to learner C, and so on round the circle. So it's a much more collaborative approach to grammar than the typical classroom activity. And this is the blank sheet of paper, which, as you can see, the first thing you do is ask them to divide it into strips by putting some horizontal lines across it. And then they write here on the left, D, I, D, I, D, I, and finally D again. And those letters stand for direct and indirect. Now, if you want to make this look a little more prepared, of course, you could have done all this yourself. But if you just do this in a lesson off the cuff, they can prepare it for themselves. So each learner in the group, in a circle, has this sheet of paper divided like so. And then we're going to dictate to the learners perhaps some of these sorts of over-direct language. You can see we've got things like, we want a bigger discount, you're wrong, that's impossible. My students love using this kind of language regularly in role plays. And in fact, if you wanted to, rather than giving them this language, you could simply use language that you've seen them use themselves in a previous role play. So this could be part of your feedback and remedial work activity. So what happens is this. They don't all write these down. You dictate the first expression. For example, we want a bigger discount. Learner A writes that one down at the top of their piece of paper. We're not accepting that. Learner B writes that one down. That's impossible. Learner C writes that one down. So just to move on, This is just showing you the first two learners. You can see learner A has written down, we want a bigger discount, and learner B has written down, we're not accepting that. Of course, that's D because it's direct. So the first thing you want them to do is now can learner A reformulate this expression, make it more indirect? And can learner B reformulate this expression and make it more indirect and write it down beneath? And of course, all the learners are doing this in the circle, not just the first two. So what you'll end up with, if their English is excellent, which it probably isn't, it'll be something like this. We want a bigger discount becomes we were hoping. Yeah, nice use of the past continuous there to keep the door open to negotiation. We were hoping for a slightly bigger. So using a modifier there, just to make it sound a little less alarming that they want a discount. And learner B is going for unfortunately, use a softener. And instead of not, instead of a negative, we're not in a position to. So it depersonalizes it. Now you can see that some of this is quite sophisticated grammar, and you could use this with advanced or upper intermediate students. But the thing with this activity is it will find its own level. If you're doing this with pre-intermediate learners, they'll still be able to do it, but they'll have obviously less of a grammatical range. The thing is that learners often assume that grammar's either right or wrong, but of course grammar's also a question of choice. It's not just about right and wrong. The way you phrase something will have a different effect. Okay, so in the next step, you can see that each learner folds over the direct expression and then reformulates from the indirect expression below. So now they can't see the first one that was on the piece of paper, they can only see the second one, okay, if you're with me. And this is now passed on to the learner next to them. So learner A passes the piece of paper on to learner B, B to C, C to D, etc. And they reformulate again, this time making it more direct. This is going to introduce the language of being direct, which sometimes you do want to be. The piece of paper is folded over again. Always each time before the piece of paper is passed on to the learner next to you, there should only be one thing for them to look at, the one that's just been written, not all the previous ones. So what you can see is that we're actually shuttling backwards and forwards between formal and informal, direct and indirect, doing lots of different grammatical things, perhaps making some mistakes, which we can look at later. And by the time the piece of paper returns in the circle to its original owner, they open the piece of paper out, and as you can see, we've got a whole series of transformations backwards and forwards between direct and indirect. I always ask them to make the last one as direct as they like, even to the point of rudeness, which in this case, this advanced group did. Quite like this one. Listen, buddy. Listen, buddy, this isn't even close to what we want. I thought that was quite good for a non-native speaker to come up with that, for a learner to come up with that one. So I hope you like this activity. It's deceptively simple. A lot of brain work and grammar work going into this, but all of it emerging from the group. And what's good about teaching grammar in this way is that instead of drawing their attention at the beginning to different grammatical choices they can make to be direct or indirect, it's actually coming from them. You'll see what they can do already, what they can't do, what they get wrong. And at the end of it, you've collected an enormous amount of classroom data in the pieces of paper that you can collect in at the end, perhaps do some correction work and pass back in a subsequent lesson. And so all of that is what I would call a grammar of negotiations lesson using simply blank sheets of paper. Well, I hope you like that one. The deathly silence doesn't encourage me. It's terrible, this talking to a wall. Very strange. Anyway, I'm going to move swiftly on. In case you didn't like that one, it's over now. And we're moving on to number 2, which is emails. So I'm going to try a poll with you. just so that we can just check in that we are all still here. And I'd like to ask you just to have a think about this, because this one is for writing practice. And I'm going to ask you, are business writing skills one of your favorite things to teach? Yes, A. B, not really. While you do that, I'm just going to go and get a glass of water. So I'll give you about 40 seconds to do that. Okay, I'm back. I should have got the water before, really. Results. Have we got any results, Henry? Where do I look for results on that? A, 20 people say yes, 41 people say they don't really like writing. Okay, possibly a few more votes still coming in. But what I expected, pretty much, twice as many people don't really like writing skills. I never really liked teaching writing skills because I like lessons to be communicative and a bit of noise, and you don't get that with a writing lesson. In fact, most writing lessons suffer from what I call the 3S problem, which is that the writing process itself is basically solitary, silent, and slow. Not the perfect ingredients for a great lesson. It's solitary, isn't it? I mean, you write on your own. You don't write collaboratively. You don't have two people holding the pen or pressing the keys. You write on your own. It's silent, usually, unless you're screaming at the computer or something. And it's slow. It's a pretty slow process. You go back, you correct yourself, you think, no, I'll move that there, I won't use that word. So how can we possibly teach writing in a kind of really hands-on way in the classroom, as opposed to just getting them to write something and then correcting it, or getting them to self-correct? Well, that's what this idea is about. Quick quote by Mr. Michael Breen. In an interesting article, where he says, the language I learn in the classroom is a communal product derived through a jointly constructed process. How can we make writing lessons a bit more supportive and collaborative than just getting them to write things on their own and, you know, maybe for homework and then they don't do it? So this is how it works. Again, we are going to start off with a blank sheet of paper, because that's our theme for this session. And we're going to produce together, that's to say the student or students and the teacher or trainer, we're going to produce a formulaic email. So the first question to ask the learners is, what do you want to write an email about? Is this a job application? Is this or a reply to a job advertisement? Is it a follow-up email after you had a sales meeting with somebody and now you just want to say, thanks for meeting me, it was nice to talk to you, I hope I was able to show you the benefits of my product. If you'd be interested in hearing more about it, don't hesitate to contact me, that kind of thing. Get them to think about what kind of email do they want to write. Now, if you teach one-to-one, this technique is perfect for writing skills, I think. But in a bit later, I'll show you how you can do it with a group. So this is how it works. Horizontal lines on the piece of paper again, just like last time with the negotiations activity. But this time we're going to cut the paper into strips, hence the little scissor icons over here. And when we've done it, here's one I prepared earlier. That's what your pieces of paper will look like when they've been cut up. And we position them like this. And basically the idea is this. Let's imagine you're teaching one-to-one to begin with. So you, the teacher, are sitting next to your learner, the paper's in front of you, and you say to them, look, we've decided what kind of email it is you want to write. Get them to plan it out and meta-plan it out if you want, using Post-its or something to begin with, so that they know the structure that they're going to produce. Okay, now just start writing. And they say, but I don't know quite what to write. Just write it. Don't worry about how correct or how inappropriate or appropriate it is. Just do it. If you're not sure about a word, put it in your own language, and I'll see if I can translate it. And so they start writing. For example, the first slip, Dear Ms. Edwards. And then maybe they write the second slip, number 2. Now they're numbering them as they go. This is not for extensive writing. It really works best with short pieces of writing, like most emails. 10 sentences max. And you can see there are mistakes already creeping in here. But that's fine. Let them continue to write. A few more mistakes. But that's okay, because what you're seeing is you're seeing what they want to say. They're writing what they can. You're seeing where they fall short of accuracy, at least. Now, once they've perhaps got to the 4th slip of paper, you, who are only sitting next to your learner, slide that one out, and you might make a few little notes or indications here as to what's wrong with it. Don't actually correct it for them, I would suggest. Just hint at improvements. I am writing, with regard, word missing as well, with regard to your job advertisement and so forth. And then pass that piece of paper back into the sequence again and take the next one. So I hope you see how this is working. The learner is writing their short email, and after they've got a little way into it, as they go along, you are simply gently sliding little bits out, not out of sight, just next to them, hinting at error, if there is any, or hinting at things that could be phrased better and putting it back. So there's actually a workflow going on the desk with you chatting. And they can talk to you, of course, if they want as well. They can say, well, why did you underline this bit? Surely this is correct. And this way, you're always working on it together. It's the idea that you're supporting them throughout. And this continues for the rest of the activity, and so on, until the email is finished and as accurate as you both want it to be. Now, you might also decide at the end of this activity that you want to throw out some of the pieces of paper, start again, perhaps interpolate a few that were missing. You think there's something you should have said earlier that you didn't. And so this is great. And when you've done and you're finished with it, and they're happy with it as well as you are, then they can key it in to their computer and keep it on in a file on their laptop or on their tablet, which they know they've captured that one. I've got that email. I've got a framework for it. And you worked on it together. Now, this technique, which I encourage you to try if you haven't done something like this before, is certainly not a new technique. It's some of you will know this is counseling learning. Counseling learning devised way back in the 1960s by Charles Curran. And this is what he says about the counseling learning process. You know how when people swim, the freestyle or the crawl, you kind of swim and you have your head in the water and then you turn your head to breathe and then you put your head back in and turn to breathe and so on. And as the swimmer turns to breathe, you feed in the language for them that they need but haven't got. And then they continue with the activity of writing their email. So it's a kind of collaborative process, as all of these are that we're looking at today. And I hope I described that clearly. It's so difficult not being able to see your expressions of puzzlement or annoyance or anything. I'm just having to take it on faith that I'm being clear here. Now, some people say, but how would you do this with a group, Mark? That's fine for one-to-one, but what about a group? Well, you can do it with a group, because if you've got your learners, again, in a circle, all working on an email, perhaps all the same email, or perhaps different types of email, you, the trainer, can actually perhaps in the center of the classroom, you can collaborate individually with each one and simply pass around the circle, giving a bit of assistance as you go. You can keep this quite relaxed chat, have a bit of music playing if you want, if that's not distracting, and move around the circle, helping them. Those of you who play chess may be familiar with the practice of champion chess players sometimes going to a local club, and they take on all the local players in a kind of a circle like this. You play against this player, and then you play against this player, and you go around in a circle, and they have a lot of time to think about their move, but you don't. And that's how this works too. So you're the sort of assistant to them as the writers. So you've actually got assisted writing in a group going on. Now other people have said to me, well, yeah, okay, Mark, I quite like this idea, but it's lots of bits of paper, isn't it? It's a bit low tech. Isn't there a slightly more 21st century way of doing it? And John Naisbitt, a futurologist, actually says that very often the best things in the 21st century are either high-tech or high-touch. And the high-touch things is what we've just been looking at with bits of paper and very personalized and friendly. But let's have a look at a high-tech version of how you could do this activity. And this is the first website that I wanted to show you if you don't know it. It's an online whiteboard and chat room. Now there are plenty of these out there, but I quite like this one. It's called Twiddler. This is the URL up here if you want to check it out. It's free. You don't even need to register for this one. As you can see, you just go to this website and you click straight on Start a New Meeting. You just click Go. And you will immediately find yourself here in the meeting room. And then I'm not going to give you the full instructions of how to use these websites today because they're simple enough anyway and you can check them out for yourselves. But basically you just enter the email addresses of any of your learners here and they can all access the same page. So everybody's on this page. But here's the clever thing. If you just click over here with text, you can produce speech bubbles or post-it boxes and you can write text in them and move them around the screen, and so can they. You can write on the same bit of the screen that they are writing on simultaneously. And you can also chat to them in the chat box to give them advice. And if you get the paid version of this, you can also talk to them. But if you don't want to bother with the talking, you don't want to pay more likely, because I know I don't like paying for anything that could be free, then you could just Skype them at the same time you're doing this. Just open a Skype window. So the whole thing that we've just looked at, you can do online. And you can print out the results as well and deal with it then. So that was my second lesson idea. All good writing is rewriting, said Ernest Hemingway. And he should know, because I think he wrote A Farewell to Arms 39 times. Still a fairly boring book in my opinion, but he wrote it 39 times. Okay, now I've been going a bit slowly through these. We've only got through 2, and I can see we've already been talking for about half an hour. I hope I'm not going too slowly for you. Let me see if I can find any comments at all. I don't know. What have we got? Oh yes, people commenting on Ernest there. So you are still there. Good, good, good. All right. All right. Okay, people explaining to each other as well. That's great. Okay, so you're having your own conversations as well while I'm going on. Let's move on. Another one for emails. Okay, a bit quicker this one. Still going with blank sheets of paper. Now this one's called the matrix format. This is for practicing fairly fixed expressions, as I'm sure you already know. I mean, a lot of emails, a lot of business correspondence is quite formulaic, and the expressions tend to be fixed ones that we use a lot, particularly at the beginnings and endings, of course. But not only that. But this one that we're looking at now works like this: blank sheet of paper divided into 4, labeled FB, IB, FEIE. Okay, and you can get them to do this on a blank sheet of paper. You don't have to prepare it at all. This stands for formal beginning. This stands for informal beginning. This stands for formal ending. and this stands for informal ending. So you're probably already getting an idea of how this one works. Now, we're not just looking at complete beginnings and endings, like, you know, yours faithfully, yours sincerely, and dear Mark, dear Mr. Powell. We're not just looking at greetings and salutations. We're looking at a bit more than that, but basically that's all the sheet of paper that they have. And then what we're going to do is, again, dictate. I'm a big fan of dictation, actually, if used creatively. Remembering Mario Rinvolucri and Paul Davis's excellent book on dictation from many years ago. But this, I don't think this one was in there. That was a bell going off. I don't know what that means, so I shall ignore it. Here are some fixed expressions that we might dictate, and their job is to write them in the quadrant on the matrix where they think they'd come. So, for example, further to our telephone conversation. Do you think that comes towards the beginning of an email or towards the end? And is it formal or is it more informal? I would suggest it comes probably towards the beginning, not right at the beginning, of course. And I would suggest it's fairly formal. So that's where that one goes. Whereas cheers Mark is presumably going to come at the end and be informal. So these are just some suggestions, of course, as to phrases you could use. There are many, many more. And if you'd like a long list, I can send you that. And this is what they do. They write them in the quadrant on the sheet. Now that's fine, that's good. I think that's better than what you'll tend to find in course books, which is look at the following expressions and label them according to whether they're formal or informal and whether they're at the beginning and ending of an email. And they just label. Labeling things seems to me like just such a non-entity of an activity. You're not learning anything by doing that. By doing it this way, I mean, first of all, it's a dictation, so there's some listening, there's some spelling, there's some writing. They can collaborate and compare with each other. And they're also committing to where they think it comes, and so that's a much more motivating type of activity. But, nevertheless, it's still a bit heads down. It's not particularly active. So is there a heads-up version we could do? And I think there is. And we're going to use another so-called humanistic technique called TPR, which is total physical response, if you're familiar with that approach. Now, the people who invented TPR thought it was mostly for speaking and listening, and you couldn't do it for reading or writing, really. But I disagree. I think if you're looking at lexical chunks, which is exactly what we are doing here, then you can certainly use TPR for this, and this is how it works. Instead of a sheet of paper, you simply mark out on the floor of your classroom a quadrant like this, a matrix. You could use just little pieces of paper or Cuisinart, let's find a use for them. Anything you like to mark out 4 areas of the classroom floor. And you label them on the wall, perhaps with some posters, and this time you simply read out the phrases and learners have to move into the part of the room which corresponds to whether it's formal or informal and whether it comes towards the beginning or ending of an email. It's a bit like, there used to be a television quiz show, I think it was called Jeopardy or something, I'm not sure exactly. And you had to go and run to a different place or something like that, depending on your answer to questions. So that's how this one works. So you can see 3 people here think that what I just said was an informal beginning. And 1 brave person thinks it's a formal ending. Okay, so if you're the only person in the classroom standing here, and everybody else is over here, then presumably everybody else is wrong. That's my theory. I'll never go with the crowd. Always be different and individual. So, no, in reality what they'll do is look at each other and copy. So you'll find people going, oh, no, I meant to be over here. And it's actually quite fun, this one. They'll fall over themselves and it's a bit of a laugh. And then after you've done this sort of physical activity, then they can sit down and you do the written one. And then they have a written record of these fixed expressions. Now, of course, you can do this with a lot more than just email writing, but that's the one we are looking at today. Oh, I'm going to run out of time. We're never going to get through everything I planned. Maybe we'll have to do another one of these if people would like me to. How are we doing? Let's have a look at some comments quickly. Okay, somebody said an interesting idea. Good. Okay, I'm going to do one more, and then we might do some Q&A, or perhaps I'll just press on. It depends what people would like me to do. Do another one, yeah. Shall I just keep going? Because Q&A is a bit clunky, isn't it? We can save that to the end. Press on. Yes, keep going, people say. Good. All right, fine. So, forget Q&A. Sorry, Henry. Let's move on. This one's about trends. You know what I mean by trend language. You know, the rising, falling, peaking, plummeting, recovering, fluctuating, all that kind of business English. If you are a business English teacher, you will have taught this kind of stuff. It's more or less written in our contract that we will. Useful language, but not very usefully taught, I think, most of the time. Often we tend to be doing things like labeling graphs, which is really just a testing rather than teaching. I mean, you know, do you know this word or don't you? So here's a slightly different approach. And let me just move it on. Here we go. This is what it looks like. And I will acknowledge that I first got this idea, because I always like to credit other people's ideas when I borrow them. This is an idea by Creighton Walker, who once did a course that I was running in Vienna. I don't suppose he's here today, but he's now a lecturer, I think, at the University of Birmingham. And it's a great idea. Simple sheets of paper. Divide them up as you can see, down the middle and from top to bottom. And then in those pieces of paper, we're going to write some trend, change, and development language. Now, this is not a simple matching exercise. I wouldn't bore you with that. We already know that. And you can tell it isn't by the way the pieces of paper have been completed. For example, in the top left-hand corner, we've got a steady decline, which is a whole phrase, whereas here, we've got level off, which has been split into two for some reason. And here we've got a partial recovery, which has also been split into two. And here we've got a few ups and downs, which for some reason is on 3. And we've got fluctuate, which is also on 3 different pieces of paper, because we're going to cut these pieces of paper up. But how do we use this? Well, the clue is in the title of the activity, Tilt Cards. When you've cut them up, you pass them to the students, whose job is to assemble them. And hopefully, they will look something like this. So, as you can see, a slight increase. They've got, if it's correct, this piece of paper should be sloping upwards slightly to show a slight increase. If they've got it sloping downwards or flat or too dramatic an increase, then we know they've got that one wrong. You can see that level off goes up and then it levels off. That's why we needed 2 cards for this one. Ditto with a partial recovery, which goes down and then partially recovers. It's a clever idea, I think, this. I wish it was mine. But I'm not going to take the credit for it, because I heard of it from Mr. Creighton Walker, and he should get the credit. Of course, unless he nicked it from somebody else. Plunge, as you can see, goes down. It plunges down. And fluctuate actually goes up, down, up. So what's nice about this activity is it's kind of self-correcting. If you look at this, you can see if they've got what the words mean or not by how they've assembled them. It's visual, it's auditory, it's kinesthetic, so if you're an NLP aficionado, then you'll like it for that reason. But I've found this just a fun discovery technique for teaching trend language, and it's using, again, just a blank sheet of paper, transformed. Okay, how are we doing so far? Oh, somebody liked that one. Nina liked that one, I think. Henry, we've done about 40 minutes. Can I go on a bit longer? Because people seem to want to go on a little bit longer rather than go to Q&A. Can we do that? Just tell me yes or no. Go on.
Yeah, that's fine.
So they're obviously doing their own thing there. Hiya, should we go on? Let's keep going. I've got millions of these. We're not even halfway through yet. I told you I was over-prepared. Are you the kind of teacher who goes into a classroom with a bloody sort of great suitcase full of stuff? Because I am, and then you don't use most of it. As long as what you did use works. Right, markets. Let's have a look at something completely different. I'll do a quick version on this one. Now, with a blank sheet of paper, you can also draw on it. If you've ever done the CELTA or one of those preliminary teacher training courses, you'll have done a lot of things on how to use pictures to teach vocabulary and grammar points. And then as we get more advanced as teachers, we stop doing all that stuff and flashcards and goodness knows what. But sometimes it's actually still quite useful. One thing I'm quite into at the moment is something called graphic facilitation, which is using pictures. So I was going to do a quick poll here. We can do a very quick one, just 30 seconds. How much use do you make of simple pictures, icons, images, and diagrams to teach business English? Quite a lot. Some, or surprisingly little, which is what I used to do. Okay, let's just have a little look. How are we doing? Quite a lot of use of pictures, 18 people. Some, 44, and surprisingly little, 50. Yeah, that's what I thought. Again, like the writing. We don't do it enough. But I'm not talking here about just doing little diagrams for teaching vocabulary. I mean, we know that stuff. Okay, we've got the final results here. What is it? 62%. No, 16% say. Oh, hang on, no, the results have all changed here. Okay. Okay, so those of you who responded, most people do hardly any pictures. Some people do a little bit, and a few people do quite a lot, but not really. Okay, well, if you go to this URL at the bottom of this slide, if you haven't already, you'll see a video that I produced last year for Macmillan on graphic facilitation. So I'm not going to describe this one to you now because there's a 15-minute video on it. On YouTube you can find it. But you can see the kind of thing that graphic facilitation is. It's basically a framework, but a visual framework. You use very simple pictures and icons. This one is a snapshot of a business. And the learner puts in what business they're in, goes in the middle here, and then different bits of information about the economic climate, trends in their business, technology. They fill all this in. You could put this on a poster, you know, an A3-sized piece of paper. And the idea is that they then, on their own or perhaps in a team, present this information back to the class. Okay, this one is fully explained in this video here on YouTube. Now, you could just draw this. You don't have to use computer icons as I've done here. But if you're not good at drawing, you might want to prepare it in advance looking something like this. But the one we're going to look at, because the general idea is that the teacher provides the language, but the content is provided by the learner. I mean, if we want our learners to be able to talk about the market they're in, well, we don't know about that, but they do. Can we provide a window onto their job that we can look through so that they can talk about what matters to them and we can feed in the language as they need it, just in time, rather than teaching them language just in case and hoping it's useful later on. So this one, which is not on the video that you'll see on YouTube, is for presenting market forces. Now, it doesn't have to be for students who work in marketing, but it works quite well with them. If you like these, by the way, I've got lots of them. I've got a whole book full of these, not published, but I've got masses and masses of these, using business models. Business models are very, very common in business schools, and these are used a lot. It seems to me they're a great resource for teaching language too. This is called Porter's 5 Forces. It's Michael Porter, who's a professor of marketing at Harvard University. But basically it works like this. First of all, what business is your learner in, and who are the players? Who are the companies in that business? Who are their competitors? That information goes here. Who's the market leader? Is it them or is it somebody else? One of their competitors. That goes here. And then who are their suppliers? Because your suppliers can exercise quite a lot of influence over how you price and market your product. Who are their customers? The customers go over here in the target market area. Through which channels do they distribute their products or services? That goes here. What technologies are necessary in order to produce their products? And they go here. You might want to feed in a bit of language. This is the upstream end of the business, the supply side. This is the downstream end of the business, the customer side, the customer-facing side. Now, are they facing any threats in their business? New entrants, new companies entering the business? Or is it likely that substitutes in the future could take business away from them? The way that iTunes, for example, practically destroyed the music industry. So you can see that this is going to be personalized by them, filled in, perhaps in teams if they all work for the same company, maybe in the same department if you work in company. And they then present this back to you using this as a sort of visual aid and an aid memoir. And you're feeding in language as they need it. So you can either do this on just a sheet of paper on the desk or affixed to a wall like a poster, perhaps using post-its, sticky labels. You can have a lot of fun with these and a great deal of language, vocabulary principally, of business, ESP as well, specific English can come out of this sort of activity. So if you're interested in graphic facilitation, then I can send you more information on that if you'd like to contact me at the end of this session. Okay, I've got to keep my eye on the clock now. If you do like graphic facilitation, this lady here, Christina Merkley, who runs a company called Shift It Coach, she actually runs online courses on how to do graphic facilitation. And she has a nice slogan, which is, don't just think it, ink it. And I like the idea that learners don't just, tell me about your business, Carlos, but here's something for Carlos to fill in first so that he does the thinking and you help him with the language, and then he tells you about his business. I think sometimes we expect our learners to respond too fast without enough scaffolding, without enough support to do that. And this is one way of doing it. Okay. Now we've got several more things on here. We've got conversation activity now. Again, using a piece of paper, but this time we just cut the piece of paper up into cards. And you can see on this set of cards, I've written down some things that are in the news at the moment, business, current affairs-y. Some of them are business, some of them are not. The Brexit, the Grexit, the Syrian refugee crisis, austerity politics, or the VW withdrawal thing because of the emissions problem. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, and the biography about David Cameron and his interest in farm animals. The FIFA criminal inquiry going on at the moment, poor old Cecil the Lion, who was killed by an American dentist who then had to go into hiding. I mean, you just choose. I'd actually let them decide which topics they're interested in. And then what happens is, if you watch this video, by the way, down here, there's a much longer explanation of how this activity works on YouTube. But you put these cards into a pile, you pick a card off the top, and you, the trainer, perhaps talk about it, and then a learner picks the next one off the top, and they talk about that for a minute or so and their thoughts on it. You can record this, of course, if you want, for feedback later. And when you've got through the little deck of cards of topics, then we go back to the first card that we picked up, and now somebody has to report, summarize what they think was said about that topic by another person. So you've really got to listen when anybody speaks about each of these topics, because you will be summarizing it later. That's the clever part of the activity. Just picking up cards and talking about them isn't so clever, really. But the fact is that you have to listen and maybe take notes, because you will be summarizing later. Here's a slightly different spin on the same activity. I've done this with some very low-level learners, and you'd be surprised how animated they get just telling you, are you a Mac person or are you a PC person? Are you a tea person or are you a coffee person? Are you a book person or a film person? Are you a morning or an evening? Are you a Facebook or a LinkedIn? This one, I mean, I hesitated to take this into a business classroom, but are you a dog person or a cat person? We got the most animated and heated discussion of the lesson. And in fact, a lot of language of discussion, argument, and negotiation came out of that. So if you've not tried something like this, I recommend these. I first devised this little activity years ago, and I've been using it ever since. Any polarity will do. It could be more business-oriented or more general, just for fun. Okay. How are we doing for time, Henry?
We're still okay, yep. If you want to continue for another 5-10 minutes, that's fine.
I'm just looking at comments here by people, so no one's really asking questions anyway, it's just comments, but lots of comments, that's great. Could I give you some information on my Cert IBET courses? Somebody says. Yes, absolutely. Actually, I'll give you my email address before we stop, and you can contact me directly if you want to, Keith, or anybody else. I do run teacher training courses for business English and also for one-to-one coaching, language coaching, if you're interested. Now, if you're going to use activities with cards, by the way, I should just quickly mention this website, which is animoto.com. I always want to say that in a false Japanese accent for some reason. It sounds Japanese. Animoto. Animoto is a great website. It's so easy to use. It's completely free. You can produce cards which will put themselves onto a video for you. You can produce a video slideshow with music, background music, animations. It does this all for you. You don't need to know anything about computers. If I can use it, anybody can. I'm the perfect screen for stuff online, because if I can use it, anybody can. And if I can't use it, you probably still can. I can't say much more about it because we're running a bit short of time. But just to say that if you're going to do an activity with cards and it's with a smaller group, you can put those cards onto the screen and you can pause the video and the cards will come up and they're all nice and colorful, and it's just a different way of doing it. But go to Animoto and try it out. Okay, let's move on. What about the business news? Don't know how many of you do business news with your classes. But I mean, with YouTube, you just find out what's going on in the world this week, go onto YouTube, and there'll be a story on there about it. You only want stories that are 2 minutes of video max, or even less. You don't want great long, in-depth news stories, but you don't just want the headlines either. You want about a minute or two of video. And then you, the teacher, you watch these clips. Perhaps you just choose 4 stories you're going to work with. So here we've got Volkswagen, BP, the TPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. I don't know if you're familiar with that going on at the moment. And the IMF doing some more forecasts of recessions again at the moment. Anyway, 4 stories, and these are the story cards on these cards here. And then as you, the teacher, watch these videos, you note down some of the key information. So for the VW story, I just noted down these 4 things. But you could have 8 with a higher level group, or even 10. And then for BP, I just noted down these. You'll notice I've got some figures. I don't tell you the context of the figures because I want them to listen and to view for that. So when you've prepared these cards, then obviously you jumble them up. Excuse me, my nose is itching. That's because I've got a cold. And as you can see, you've now jumbled all these cards up, and then the learners are going to watch these 4 little video sequences about 4 news stories, and their job is to watch, look at the cards if they want, but don't touch anything. Don't let them move these cards while they're watching the video. Otherwise, you have a useless activity called watch a video and move pieces of paper across a table. So they watch the video, and then when you pause the video after story 1, the whole group is to assemble the information for the first story. So what was it? Was it VW? And which 4 pieces of information go with that story? And then you do the same for the second, the third, and the 4th story. At the end of it all, they can watch the whole thing again and check if they like. You could give different groups in the class different stories to listen for. And you could also ask them at the end to comment or summarize on those stories. So this is, again, I mean, a lesson where the preparation, really, when you get used to it, just takes a matter of, what, 20 minutes to prepare this lesson. It could last an hour and a half, because you would go in and ask them about what's going on in the news, maybe show them some pictures that you've found online from the news, and then show them the cards, let them look at the cards and decide which ones they think go with what, then play them the videos, then they do the activity, then they summarize it, and you do some vocabulary work. You've got a very rich lesson of conversation, input, practice based around news stories. I think YouTube is a great resource for things like that. And again, it can be done without a course book, without an activity itself, just with a simple technique to get them talking. Now, just quickly before we stop, we'll just do one more thing, and so I'll just do one more poll and then show you one more thing quickly. How do you feel about using authentic video in the classroom? A, I'm all for it. B, well, sometimes it's useful. C, nah, it's more trouble than it's worth. Any thoughts on that? Let's see how we're doing. Oh, good, lots of people like video. And only 8 people think it's more trouble than it's worth. Okay, so the vast majority of you like using authentic video in the classroom. That's great. But even if you don't, we'll have a quick look at what you can do. Splendid. Okay. Let's move on and do this. So first, just a quick online gem, I think. This is Real Times. It used to be called Real Player. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a straightforward video player, just like Media Player on your PC or QuickTime on your Mac. It's called Real Player, and it uses Flash, which used to mean, I think it didn't work on Mac, but it might work on it now. But the reason I like Real Times is because it's completely free, and as well as being able to download videos from the internet really easily, because once you've downloaded this, a little box will appear at the top of the screen on your computer, and if a video is downloadable, it will flash for you, and you'll say, do you want to download it? And you click it, and it will put it straight into your video file on your computer, and you have it. It's just perfect for that. But it'll do 2 other things which are even more useful, I think. It will edit your video if it's too long, and if you go to the edit facility on Real Times, you will be able to decide where you'd like the video to begin and where you'd like it to end, and it will crop it so that you just get the bit of the video you want. You can see on this diagram here that you can slide cursors across, and also from this side, and you can choose the bit of the video that you want. But it will do one other thing, which I think is fantastic, and it will do this. You can take photographs from the video. So if you click on a little camera icon, which comes up here, you can take a picture, a still from the movie of the video, and put it in your picture file. So now you've got pictures from a video, still pictures, which you can use with that video. And we're not going to have a lot of time to talk about the things you could do with it, because we're almost coming to the end of our little session. But one thing you can do, if you choose one of those infographic type videos, of which there are a lot on YouTube, the did you know that the world's got 5 minutes to exist and somebody drinks Loch Ness every 10 minutes, water consumption is so high and the planet's only got there's loads of stuff online with sort of staggering statistics, I suppose is what you'd call it. And you can simply take little still pictures from that video, collect them, let your learners watch the video, and then just from the visuals that you have taken from it, can they recap, can they recall what they've seen? It doesn't have to be that kind of video. Let's say you were using a Steve Jobs video, one of those old fantastic Apple presentations he used to make at Macworld every year. Well, you could take stills of all his, say 5 or 6 of his visual aids that he uses, take a segment of his presentation, and then after they've watched it and you've done some work on his delivery and his technique, you could give them the visuals and let them try to, as it were, reconstruct a bit of his presentation from just the visuals. So again, you're using authentic video, which has been prepared for you, still pictures, which you've got for free, and the learners. And you have a lesson which is very rich, it's video driven, very good for presentations. And there were some other things I was going to talk to you about on presentations. I don't know if I'm supposed to do this, but I'm just going to flip through some of the other things I was going to talk to you about, because I'll probably get into trouble if we go on too much longer. But maybe we can just make these available to you, or since they may not make sense on their own, perhaps we can do another webinar and I can talk to you about some of these things. This, for example, is a fantastic website for interviewing, job interview skills, an absolute must. But because we've got to come to the end, well, I hope you enjoyed it. It was a bit wild and woolly, so thanks for bearing with me, because I've not done these before and I realized my timing was obviously off, but I hope it was interesting and motivating for you anyway. Leaving you with Mr. Saint-Exupéry, who wrote Le Petit Prince, if you're familiar with that children's story. He was also an aviator and a very, very good writer. He said, perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. There are many more things I could have added today, but I tried to strip it down to the basics, some simple thoughts for boosting your business English lessons. And even if they're not top tips, I hope that there is something that you've been able to take from them. And if we've got just a minute or two, maybe we can do a quick Q&A. I'll have to check with Henry on that. And if you'd like to see some of the other things that we didn't have time to look at, perhaps we can arrange to do another webinar at some point in the future. If you'd like that, just let Macmillan know. And if you want to keep in touch with me for anything at all, then that's my home email address. That's my personal one, markdavidpowell@yahoo.com. So if you wanted to ask me any questions or get any extra bits and pieces that we didn't have time for, please do contact me. Always happy to hear from you. Otherwise, if you've got a question about books and the Macmillan materials, then contact Borzia, who's here at the moment. She's the marketing manager, and those are her details. Okay, sorry I keep scratching my nose. I'm going to sneeze in a minute, and I've just got to hold it off. So Henry, what do you think? Time for a quick Q&A, or shall we just say old lang syne, old lang syne?
And well done. Great session. If you're happy to answer a couple of quick questions, I think that would be a good idea. Let's see what comes in the chat box, shall we? If you've still got a voice.
Yeah.
So I'm opening it up to the floor.
Yeah. It's getting a bit sore in my throat. But
so I'll stop the recording now anyway, and we'll just open it up to the chat box.
Okay. Remind me not